Welcome everybody to another edition of the Art Business Podcast as we move towards the winter break, or Christmas as I like to call it. This is going to be one of the last recordings this year, and I'm very, very excited about it because I've been working with the director of Street Art Museum Amsterdam, where I take my students every year, with the director Anna Stolyarova for several years now, always taking my students, and it's one of the highlights of the tour. I get great feedback from my students, but I've never done a podcast with Anna. And welcome, Anna. You're very welcome.
Thank you. Hello, David. Hello, everyone.
So I'm going to start with the question I usually start with, which is, do you have any memories, Anna, about how you first got into this thing called art?
Yes, my name is Anna Stolyarova. I'm 50 years old. I live in Amsterdam, and I'm a founder and a program director of Street Art Museum Amsterdam. I grew up in a small town called Lutsk at the time, a Soviet Socialist Republic of Ukraine. I was privileged and I had opportunity to travel to the international exchange programs such as pioneers camps in Poland or Bulgaria. During one of these summer exchanges, they took us to Krakow and I faced a thing called art for the first time in a Wawel museum in a castle. I've never seen anything like this before. Old masters, Renaissance. I didn't know any of these words. It was more about colors and the beauty and the finesse. And it became very clear to the little Soviet girl that it was an object for the rich. And it was an object of the past. It is something that you go back, like when you watch a costume drama on BBC and everybody's beautiful and polished and it's shiny. And that's how I saw it. And that's what was art to me. In Soviet Union, in our hometown, we had a puppet theater and a drama theater. But to me, it was more a lifestyle and a culture than art as we know it today.
Yes, I think we have a tendency to kind of focus on this thing called visual arts and narrow it down to paintings hanging on walls, frescoes, sculptures, decorative art, and so on. And it's more, I quite agree with you. It's more than that. Just coincidentally, you're talking about it looked like a costume drama. I'm re-watching a very good adaptation of Tolstoy's War and Peace, also Russian history, about the Tsar and the wars and etc. and the ballrooms and the art and so on. It's very good. I was watching that last night, so it's quite a coincidence that you mentioned that as a childhood memory.
Well, in the Soviet Union, it was very clear that decadence, bourgeois, the luxury, um, it's a thing of the past. The modernism, futurism, minimalism is the way of the future, and it's what you can make yourself. In the Soviet Union, artisan was above fine art. Fine art, like a Disneyland, sort of, at least in our village, was related to capitalism. But folklore, craft, the vyshyvanka, the cross stitching was elevated to the art form. So I think maybe that's why eventually street art was the only form of art that felt natural to me, because without our past, right, we're just blank sheets walking around, and the past what defines your identity. And in my case, it's 18 years of Soviet Union.
That's, yeah, that's so interesting, I think, for the listeners, because I don't think I've ever spoken with someone who had that upbringing in the Soviet Union and then has moved more recently. We'll probably come to that. Actually, apropos which, Anna, I wondered if you could, I know that you came for higher education to London in the UK, studying education, business administration and management, as well as business law. So uh, can you say a little bit more about those studies? You know, did you enjoy them, or did you think it would lead to a job? Did it inform what you're now doing in any way?
Well, I came to London to study because I enrolled in Kyiv State University, or my parents enrolled me in to Kyiv State University into philology department. English was my first foreign language, German was the second. And the idea was that I will blossom into a wife of a diplomat, and we all gonna go and buy foreign goods abroad. We'll have access. But after 2 years, it was clear that physical study was not possible. Soviet Union collapsed. Ukrainian language was not yet used in the university. Kyiv State University was the only university which was a state university. So teachers were crying at classrooms because the books were Russian English, but they had to teach in Ukrainian English, and they didn't speak Ukrainian themselves. It was clear that there was no such subject as history of Ukraine. There was a history of Soviet Communistic Party in Ukraine. And for me, the whole reason of university, at least in my romantic head, was to learn, to study, to absorb knowledge. And there was no knowledge. There was just despair. On top of it, economic crisis, when the supermarket has two items, cigarette Winston and tomato sauce with onion in a jar, that's your food. But for me, it was despair. And suddenly we had these beautiful British students from Leeds University on exchange. And luckily for me, two of them got robbed, and the university bought them tickets by plane. So they went back to UK after their exchange by plane, but 2 tickets by bus from Prague to London were left for grabs. And because I was always adventurous and I took them to Baltic states when they just separated to see the Baltics, and I took them to my hometown to meet my family, the British students basically gifted me these 2 tickets from Prague to London and made me an invitation, inviting me to study to London. So I packed a rucksack. My family gave the last $322 they had, which were the saving for a bribe for my brother to go to university. So I had the responsibility to return this back into a family fortune pot. And I set for my way to London. So when I arrived in London, it was January 1993. I've never, for example, saw Black people before. I've never saw Indian people before. I ended up in Shepherd's Bush. It was a total culture shock because I imagined that everybody in Britain would be wearing the tall hats and look like Sherlock Holmes and Miss Marple. So it was a bit of a surprise to basically land Shepherd's Bush,
Yeah.
Camden, punk. It was amazing,
And it's
techno.
like
It was
very exciting.
amazing, but
Yeah.
it's nothing what I expected. And
No. Yeah.
I wanted to stay,
That's
so I
fantastic.
went to study
Yeah.
in um, I went to study to Westminster College Business Administration,
Yes.
because to me as a newcomer, it was the fast, clean way to get to know how the system works. If I want to survive in London, if I am applying for political asylum and I am waiting for my residence permit, I want to know how the country works. So after the graduation with excellent marks, I enrolled in Westminster University to follow up on business administration bachelor. However, after 2 years, it was extremely boring because I was working in a law firm as an administrative assistant. And at the same time, I was studying administration, and theory and practice did not match for me. So one of the lawyers in the law firm where I worked suggested to look at law. And I was very lucky to be accepted to London Guildhall University to study business law part-time in the evening. And during the day, I worked at the law office of Sinclair Ocean Temperley. So I felt more connected.
Fantastic. And then at some point you left London for Amsterdam, I believe, where you then started work as a senior digital producer and project manager. Can you tell us about that transition from your studies to that job in Amsterdam? Why did you go to Amsterdam?
For love. I was still working at the law office when I met my first husband, and he convinced me to move to Amsterdam. Two reasons. One, I shared an apartment with three boys in Baker Street, and one of them ended up marrying, I think, Sporty Spice. Another one dated Zoe Ball. And as far as I was concerned, I was in the juice of London in the 90s. But to him, I was a 25-year-old sharing an apartment with three boys, and he convinced me into more of the Hausfrau mode, that in Amsterdam, you get social apartment, you work part-time, you have good income. So the lifestyle of the Netherlands is much better than Britain, and I'm 25, and I should start having children and getting married, and it's the age. So it kind of made sense. Plus, if I wanted to become a lawyer in UK, I would have to pay £30,000 at the time, a school law school fee. And that would mean that I would have to stop working full time, and I couldn't. And to get a grant from a major law firm to pay for you to go to law school for a year full time was not possible for me as a newly arrived immigrant. So it made sense to accept his generous offer and marry, and to move to Amsterdam and the Netherlands. I worked at first at Van Doorn Advocaten, then I moved to Sony because I wanted something more practical and to go to Japan. And I did a short stint in Brussels for Sony Vaio, so I accomplished my dream. I went to Japan, but I also overachieved as always and ended up at the factory in China. And that thing woke up a communist child in me. I could not believe that 60,000 people would be enslaved for 2 years on a minimum wage, living in the appalling conditions, not being able to go home for 2 years, not being able to date for 2 years, because they're making machines which would be cheap for a European market. So all of that is for us to have two computers and not one computer. And it was at the same time as the movement came, ecology, sustainability. It's a beginning of human rights. And I believe in all of this. I am a romantic. So for me to continue working for Sony and witness the Chinese factory was not reconcilable. And that's how I ended up. And I was fortunate in the creative industries. By 2010, 2007, I was working at DDB and kicking off with a huge campaign for Philips. We worked with Wong Kar-wai, we worked with Vincent Peters for photography, we worked with Unit 9 in London, which is an incredible digital production house. And it was a very educational experience of how, in a short period of time, a small group of professionals could deliver a result that the whole world is in wow. And since then, I worked with Mini Vegas, Blink, 180, and Blast Radius. However, it was Western Union campaign in 2011 and 12 that made me think about the world of betters in the real life applicable way. rather than something we just made. Because that's, after a few years in advertising, that became a little bit, again, capitalistic and maybe even irresponsible, because you would blow up $50 million on this campaign for this TV. And then this $50 million is a lot of money. Today, I think it's an atoms machine for Ukraine to protect themselves against the bombs. That's the cost. And that 50 million would flow on something that would only have license to play for 6 months or a year. And then it gets discarded and thrown away. And you can't show even your work, always what you've done. And for me as a producer, all I have is the making of film that basically summarizes in 1 minute 3 years of work. And that didn't feel right somehow. So the World of Betters campaign by Western Union, on which I produced, the digital part, was about creating a website where people around the world would submit their better. And if Western Union team selects it, they would get $1,000 to make it happen. And that model, or at least that thinking that actually you can do something with as little as $1,000, you do not need 50 million, was an exciting, engaging concept for me, which I woke up my brain.
It's fantastic. I remember one of my alumni of the art business master's degree in London. She with no money set up an exhibition in London of this was a long time ago, of contemporary artists from Tel Aviv.
Oh.
And she didn't. She worked with two friends, and they found a pop-up space, a disused building office in Hoxton Square, associated with White Cube and the YBAs. Great location. They got sponsorship from. This is obviously controversial now. Israeli Airways sponsored them a little bit of money because they thought this was the Israeli embassy. They got beer from I won't say, but they everything was given to them because the people were excited by this project. And I remember going to it, and they, it's packed, and it was fantastic. It was this art that we'd never seen before, of these young, often kind of ignored artists for obvious reasons, working out of Tel Aviv. And it was just such a success. And I remember she used to come and do a lecture saying, we did this with no budget at all. You can do it. Just reach out. You get the idea going. You get people to believe in it, and they will, what we would say, crowdfund you these days.
Yeah, and I think was very, very interesting. That was the time, if you actually think about it, if you reflect in the past. But this was the time, 2005 to 2010, also when Airbnb came up to replace Hospitality Club. The first travel with local. Don't go to big hotel. Don't book a guided tour. Book a local who'll show you around the city in the minibus and feed you homemade sandwiches on top of a hill of Lisbon.
This sounds familiar.
So that's kind of that was the beginning of this, let's call it bottom-up revolution.
Yeah.
And I think, we were lucky to witness it as a generation.
Absolutely. And I know that what I now know and my students know as SAMA, or the Street Art Museum in Amsterdam, I know that it was born with a different name, as very often institutions are. In 2010, I believe that when you first set up the street art idea, it had this fantastic name, Glamorous Outcasts. I mean, it sums you up, really, doesn't it? It's
Yes, it's a book.
Yeah.
It's a book by Elizabeth Wilson. It's called Glamorous Outcasts, and it's summarizes in an academic way, but very interestingly written, the history of bohemians. So 100 years ago, the Industrial Revolution and the first middle-class educated group of people decide not to follow Industrial Revolution, but to focus on arts. To me, this led to, or connected directly to Dadaism. To me, it is directly connected to Surrealism and to the happenings and to the multiples and fluxus movements. But Sama was not a planned conception. Yeah, we are now 13 years old, as I call it. We have reached our bar mitzvah age. And when we started, again, it was not planned. One of the major business learnings following law, Six Sigma, and Prince 2 education was an ability to write a laconic and persuasive presentation, as well as creating smart budget and cost proposal. I love to optimize, and street art, when I came across it in 2010, was exactly like that. It wasn't about give me $1 million. It was more about let's see what we can do with what we have. And I remember the first statements from the first artists I hosted in my house, because it started by hosting people in my house because there was no place to sleep during the festival. So I was a volunteer, and they would live with me and they would tell me things. And one of the things was that, Anna, don't worry. Show me what you have. We'll see what we can do. Oh, we need a special spray to keep a stencil attached to the wall. Anna, no. Palo, a stick. Yeah, give me a stick, and stick will hold the stencil close to the surface, and that's how you get a perfect clean line. So for me, it was about, I finally could apply all my theory to practice. So for me, Sama started in 2009 as a research project about cultural activities and what to do in a neighborhood for Time Out magazine. Nina Segal, a brilliant writer for New York Times, became an editor, and she opened the courses called Investigative Journalism. And I joined them thinking I can write about all the cool stuff I did in advertising. But she was very strict. And she said, no, you have to go to your neighborhood and find me a story about your neighborhood. And then summarize it in 400 words. And that was the 8 workshops class. I was challenged because I went to my neighborhood. Amsterdam New West is the biggest district of Amsterdam. We are 150,000 people, but we are outside of a ring. We are not a classic Amsterdam architecture. We belong to Van Eesteren and Mondrian legacy of green living and style. And we are labeled as Dogs of Berlin on Netflix. We are 60% to 70% Muslim. So we have a stigmata. One of the people wrote on a Google business review about Sama, don't go there, the district is full of immigrants.
Oh, goodness.
But this basically defines the reason for starting Sama, is to change the perception. In 2009, I was just writing about it. In 2010, I joined the first Amsterdam Street Art Festival, again by a tip from Nina Segal. She said, why don't you go and see what you can write about that? Also in our district, I discovered the studio of Hugo Kagman, which is the first stencil king of Dutch graffiti scene. It's like Black Lorette in Paris. And through him, Harry Rucha, the A Gallery, which is Fluxus and Multiple Movements, and the book fairs and publications about the ephemeral art. So this was my first educators. So by 2010, I started lobbying for the first wall. The first walls came in 2012. So if you count from the first production point of view, Sama was formed in 2012. However, we were still going under the name of Glamorous Outcasts because it was about showing, not joining mainstream and main opinion, but looking at reality, looking at nuances, and giving even my neighborhood and people who live in it, like me, our due. We are not second-rate citizens. We do not live in a Muslim ghetto. We are people. And that by 2013 created 25 murals. By 2015, we had a flock of tourists coming in, which was more than I could handle on my own. So I had to form volunteers in the neighborhood. I had to reach out to students, to colleges, to local people, and trying to source the demand, because demand was coming, but we had no supply per se, except for the murals and the route. And in 2015, it was clear that I need what I call an adult board of directors if my foundation to be stable and sustainable and survive the hype. So the official NGO Sama changed its name to Street Art Museum Amsterdam in 2016. So that's why I still really don't know when we were born.
No, that's really good. You said something about, suddenly you had a lot of cultural tourists, maybe we can say, coming out of central Amsterdam to, like I do probably on the tram with my students. It's a wonderful route. And meeting you off the tram, and immediately you take us into this fantastic world, in my opinion, outdoor. The only problem is when it's pouring with rain and it's cold. We've had that before and windy, but generally speaking, even with that, it's fun. And you take us straight into the world of street art. Anna, before we actually talk, because really, we should be talking about the art and the artist, but I just want to, as I'm on this art business MA, maybe you could just say a little bit more about if you had to define Sama as an art business, for want of a better word. You've already said that you were using some volunteers, so I was just going to ask you: is it a for-profit institution or is it charitable status? How does that work in the Netherlands? How is it financed, and how many staff do you have, if any?
Yep, my sense. We are a formal NGO. In Dutch, we have ANBI status in a tax office. That means that we adhere to full formal rules of a formal NGO. We are a charity, and every year our team, led by me, prepares the funding roadmap, which today I'm happy to say is an 80% success rate, and we receive grants. We do not have organizational support. In the Netherlands, it's very common to apply to Amsterdam Fonds for the Kunst, for example, for a 4-year plan, or a municipality for a 4-year plan. But we've never been formally, I think, ready for that step yet. I'm not ruling it out, but for now, we are project funded. We do not have donations, and actually our tourist income is probably less than 0.5% at the moment. So we literally applying for projects and executing the funding we've received. And today we have 6 to 10 freelancers working around me, collection managers, art historians, fundraisers, communication project managers, consultants, advisors. 10 volunteers. These are students and local residents, and 5 board members, because to be a formal NGO, you have to have 3 to 5 board members who oversee my work. They don't get paid. It's a volunteer position, but they help me to adhere to all formal rules of an NGO And of course, they are honorable people. One is a formal youth and worker and policymaker. One is an ex-deputy mayor. One is an ex-senior advisor to art and culture, a civil servant. One is an activist, and one is an ex-theater director and a consultant to small culture organization. So I'm very proud to have these people supporting me in summer operations.
That's great. And so now we're going to think more about the art and the museum and the whole point of it. I mean, London, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think London or anywhere in the UK has a street art museum. So this is a model I'm not familiar with. Is that correct? It doesn't. So if it's correct, I'm just gonna. I mean, to me and my students, if I take them around looking at street art in London, as I often do, um, I'd like you to tell us what is the whole point of a museum of street art, because to most listeners, that might seem like a contradiction in terms, given the freedom and potential illegality, which you've already flagged, that street artists tend to profess in their practices. So turning that into a museum, because I'm aware that a lot of the listeners won't have experienced what I've experienced, and I understand it, but maybe you could sort of tell them how the museum works.
Uh, it's funny because that's what I do 60 times per day when the tourist rings the doorbell of our office. And asks me, is this a museum? Where is a museum?
I
How
was
is
there.
it a museum? Can I get inside of a museum? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
Sama was created to fuel such confusion in a way, because
Yes.
that's what street art does. It
Yes.
provokes. And street art is on the streets. So the museum or its collection is located on the streets. So this is the first concept to grasp, is that it's not a colonial box of gold protected against the people. It's the other way around. We live in the museum. And that's the romantic part. You have to walk the walk and discover the artworks in situ. I believe personally that museum is not about building and the security guard. There is a beautiful book called New Museums, and it discusses what defines a museum. Is it its building and its architecture, or is it a collection? There is another beautiful book called Radical Museology, and Radical Museology touches upon ephemeral or intangible heritage. So I believe that museum is about the collection. We have more than 300 artworks, which are all located within 4 kilometers radius. So they are in one location. According to Reinhardt Academy, teachers and students, it's a prestigious heritage academy in Amsterdam, it is a collection. And if it's a collection, it is a museum. Now, our staff are professional art historians and collection managers. They're not business managers. They're not vitrine managers. They're not sellers. They're not self-appointed curators without education. No, 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 no. What we're trying to do with the team is to bring these two worlds together and see, do they fit, as you say? How do you reconcile the madness of anarchism and some culture and total freedom? I do what I want, when I want it, how I want it, with the curated, selected, institutionalized, deconstructed, reconstructed, but forensic description. Yeah, because one of the hardest part is to describe. Because you cannot describe, you cannot define. You cannot define, you cannot document. So this is the logic of the action words, the keywords that begin to either help or destruct. Today, we are still bending the rules of a traditional colonial model of a museum. And with a new definition of ICOM, what museum is, the doors of perception are opened with an introduction of a term, intangible heritage, which finally allows ephemeral street art to enter in the room in a dress it chooses to wear, no uniform. And I am fighting that battle. So I think the hardest part to grasp is the building, followed by you have to walk. It's not served to you on a platter. A lot of people that, and I speak more or less with everyone, every person who rings the doorbell, to say that you have to walk. And then I can't just walk into one room and get a solution served to me on a platter. Well, no, because you came to see street art, which is evolution of graffiti. And graffiti is about conquering. We have a heritage project right now. In January, we will be, unfortunately, only in Dutch, a little commercial, but there will be a dissemination of 1 year of results of 1 year research, which touch the subject of graffiti and street art. Is it heritage? And because participatory heritage is a hype at the moment, there are, I think, 130 projects last year got granted by National Heritage, a very prestigious grant under the FARO rule, to evaluate if it's heritage or not through participatory methods. So if the neighborhood or the people say it's a heritage, it has to be. And this is bottom-up museology, which is, again, it's still, for me, a testing field. You know, it's the first pancake. It's still a ball, but what became clear during this research, when we approached the graffiti artists, who also artists, or position themselves as street artists or contemporary artists, to review a summary of graffiti dictionary. I spent 3 months doing research. I've compiled a clean version of English graffiti dictionary, and I wanted them to review it. One of the first comments was, why? This is for practicing field. It's not for theoretics. You shouldn't stick your nose in our dictionary. It's for us. It's like a criminal code, which we're not gonna necessarily tell people who are not part of the world. The second part that came in is that graffiti and street art are two very different things. So for the name and sake of research, we focused on art sponsored with public money. Yeah, so it's not about even the private commission. It's not about graffiti, but it's public money. Sama is 99% sponsored by public funding. So everything we produce, exhibition, artworks outside, paste up actions, is public heritage because it's public money. They are the owners more than anything. Third, ownership. It's very easy when the artist is dead. It's not so easy when the artist is alive, young, and subculture. You don't know which way will swing. So there is no precedent for it. There is no roadmap or template you could follow to solve the issue. You need to be innovative and imaginative. For this heritage research, I had to do a little research about the history of street art museums. The reason we are called Street Art Museum Amsterdam is because the domain name, streetartmuseum.com, was taken by St. Petersburg. It was a Russian organization, which I think now is an institute, and they, at the time, were the first to claim the word streetartmuseum.com. When you go to ChatGPT and you ask them, could you please provide me a list of the first 10 street art museums in the world, it actually begins with New York. Museo del Barrio, It was a social eco-neighborhood museum, which showed street art as part of the income, but focused on solving social issues of the neighborhood. Sama goes back, according to ChatGPT, to 2012. After us comes Urban Nation. After Urban Nation comes Museum of Graffiti in Miami. And in 2016 also comes MoCo, a modern contemporary art museum, often labeled as a Banksy museum. Then comes Strat. And now I'm watching at least a European scene because I'm invited to speak in different cities in different countries. Although municipalities are still afraid of the word museum per se, because it is a conservative part of population, the word collection appears more and more. And cities declare having a collection. So I suspect within 5 to 10 years, there will be a hat, the little one the Pope has, which will be kind of rewording collection into museum.
Absolutely. Just thinking now about the wonderful art that I see every year when I go to the museum. And it does to me, maybe not to my students who might only visit the once and for the first time, to me, it becomes a palimpsest. It does become a collection which is added to every year. So on that level, it runs parallel with other museums, which are always getting, new acquisitions to their collections. What I'd really like you to talk about, Anna, is offer us some of the excitement of the commission process and the initial reaching out to the artists, the discussions with them. But also, as I understand it, you're talking about this is public money. So you told us already that that you're in a kind of 70% Muslim population where in the district where the museum is. How do you go about speaking to the artists of what they want to do, what the people are willing to have, after all, in their own social public spaces? But also, maybe you could also say something about how various of your artists have been site specific, not necessarily reflecting your community, but sometimes just creating something beautiful. Why not? And but how they fit it to the canvases, for want of a better word, like the ends of a block of flats or on an electricity box that I've seen there. There's all sorts of contexts. Maybe I've asked you a big question there. I'm just getting you to share with us some of your excitement of when you're working with these artists and how they cope with all these issues.
I would not call the first artworks commissions because I came up with the concept. That's why the difference between classic art and in the last 15 years, as I just realized that I'm 15 years in this movement out of 50, so 1/3 of my life, I involuntarily had to study the history of art. And in a classic art, you have a curator and an art historian who decide what goes and what doesn't. On the street, the beauty of street art for me and its innovation, the artist decides. It doesn't need a curator or producer or commissioner. It knows better. The artist knows better because they do it every day. That's where, for me, street art is borderline fine art and craft. It's that form of craft that eventually evolves into the art form, like I started at the beginning with folklore or artisan productions. So I would not call the first artworks commission. It was more like a bunch of friends figuring out what can be done with this or that blind spot. In my case, it was Bitoy Andrea. Bitoy is from Barcelona. She worked with Banksy at the Cannes 2008 festival in London. She's an incredible stencil cutter. And she came for a commission in a restaurant, but stayed at my house. And one day she said, Anna, let's go pasting. we're gonna get arrested. It's gonna be that. No, we walked around. I saw some spots. I have an idea. Follow me. Carry the bucket with the stick, and we will go and quickly paste up. So she made it accessible. She made it that me, a corporate office plankton, could actually go out there and do some action. And it's amazing. Before that, everybody was hiding when making. So I spent, let's say, 2 years watching result, but I never saw it in action. When we got the first 9 little walls, which were scheduled to be demolished, they were scheduled to be demolished. The lifetime was 1 to 2 years. We could afford artistic freedom. So I tried to work with local street art organization, but it was very quickly clear that they can't just bring a bunch of German graffiti artists who will do amazing stuff. No, 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 no. They needed somebody to talk to local residents about the pains of moving out, pains of living in a new area after living in this one for 25 or 30 years, about losing home but gaining a new one, about the pains of a housing corporation dealing with angry residents, about the group of residents who are so attached to the heritage of Van Eysteren, an architect, that they will call a police on you even though you have a permission to paint, just to make it difficult for you because you are painting over the bricks of heritage of architecture. And that was my role. So I realized I need a local crew. That's why collection never went around the city by design. It stayed locally, where we can control it, where we know the people, where we can gather together and tell the police, it's our project, we live here, it's our walls. Stinkfish and Bastardia came to paint a big wall, which fell through in 2012. So the first official painted rather than pasted artwork are Beginnings by Stinkfish and Anxiety and Pain Relief by Bastardia from Colombia. Neither of the artists named their works, but we had to, in order to give a connection, create a story, and build this bridge with a neighborhood, that the artwork belongs to them, and Anxiety and Pain Relief is about losing your home but getting a new one and finding a way to deal with the difficult and complex issues of urban transition. Today, since 2019, Corona was for us a high point because we were the only museum in the Netherlands open to public. We have no entrance, no exit, so you could cycle or run and exercise during Corona. And we got some funding to create a multimedia tour with QR codes and a free easy travel app. We got the funding to hire the first collection manager. And since then, since 2021, we work predominantly on public or private projects where we commission, as you say. Now, contemporary commission comes with a participatory process, which will not be for every artist. And that's why maybe we are losing now on top art talent and artistic freedom. But I think that people who live across the wall do have a choice what they look at. That's the difference. And the beauty of street art was that the artists would go in a neighborhood, we would hang out, they would make friends, they would listen to people, and they would put a joke into the artwork or some form of reference into the artwork. That Muhammad, who lives next to Pez's Happiness mural, would jump out every time we have a tour and go, M on the head of the fish is M for Muhammad, I am Muhammad. Or the local mom would come out and say, my kid's name is hidden in a butterfly or in a bird of this mural. Or this is my kid's face. It's in the wall, they integrated my child. Or as in Bastardia's Memories mural, which you witness a production of when Corona hit, and then you see the final result. And it's the first mural on which we put virtual reality camera to record. So in VR glasses, you have an opportunity to go up on the elevator with the anonymous artist, which you don't get to do ever. Not stand next to her, not go on the elevator to her, not look at your neighborhood from above with her. And that's for us maybe wins over hardcore artistic freedom, because artists will leave, but we will live with an artwork and watch it every day. So I've now and my team working out, we have 7 different participatory models, and I'm actually practicing them depending on the location, and we're experimenting with these participatory models. In one, the residents give keywords, and then we rewrite it into a brief to the artist, so they don't get what they have to do, a curatorial, but they do have inspiration. In some cases, we give artists freedom, but a theme, because that's what worries or excites the neighborhood where the wall will appear. But then we ask 2 or 3 artists to participate in a closed call, and then we let people choose which one that appeals to them the most, and the most voted one gets painted. We invite artists to do a series of workshops with the neighborhood before he comes up with an idea for the mural. So we do have now the toolbox or a toolkit to deal with public funding whilst figuring out how to reserve as much space as possible in the formula for the artistic creativity and freedom.
Yeah, I think you've explained that really well. It's just so interesting hearing the way the way this kind of gentle curation, one might call it, works with the artists, and
Yes.
and everybody's, it's so democratic, Anna, as we've experienced when we walk around with you. It always, I think the success of it in some ways is because there's very little that you don't experience that much vandalization. That these pieces that I see every year are still there, and they're beginning to fade a little bit, maybe. And I was just going to ask you, do the artists ever come back to restore and conserve, or is it considered that in the end it will just fade away?
This is a very interesting discussion because, as I mentioned already, our heritage research for project for 1 year, we had 3 round tables in different parts of the Netherlands, in Leeuwarden and Lelystad and in Amsterdam. And the general notion from the artist is, I don't want to restore. If you want me to come back, I will paint something new.
Mm.
And of course, while the artist is alive, you can't restore it with somebody else against his will.
Mm.
On the other hand, I would say until 2015, such thing as a contract was not there. Money were not there.
Mm.
Happiness budget was 300 euros. Today, this wall is 3,000 to 5,000 euros in cost.
Mhm.
With the 3,000 and 5,000 euros going to come a contract, which will probably stipulate what happens if after 3 years the wall is damaged or vandalized or removed. But today, such contracts don't really exist. And that's one of the most difficult parts when it comes to restoration. And again, for me, I'm a romantic. It's an organic movement. It started from on its own. It started like planet Earth. Yeah, God did not create it. It started with a molecular and it grew into what we have today, the complex social political system. Yeah, so for me, street art is kind of reflecting to this. Yeah, and really, and that's why the contract would be enforcing something
Mhm.
that comes with the money. Money just came in. There is no precedent.
Mhm.
But when it comes to restoration, again, 99% paint over something new, don't restore the old. So we
Yeah.
just let them fade away like you do, like I did to my father who passed away 3 years ago. We didn't replace his bodily parts and turned him into Robocop. We let him fade away, and we cherish his memory.
One of my students about 10 years ago from Southeast Asia, she's an artist, and when she graduated, she said, I'd like to give a gift back to Sotheby's Institute in Bedford, our beautiful 18th century building in Bedford Square, which you're always you're always very welcome to come to should you be in London. But her project, and we accepted it, she made these Buddhas, standing Buddha figures out of white soap, and they were put in the toilets, and a little sign said, please wash your hands on the Buddha statue. And gradually, these statues obviously lost their features, and in the end, it was just like soap in the bath. At what point throw it away, or are you thinking about sustainability? I thought that was a wonderful example of one ethical viewpoint is that art shouldn't be restored. You know, there are some very important philosophers that take that point of view, and others, of course, just think, oh, but we need to preserve it for future generations. But you know, in my view, like yours, I think future generations deserve their own art, and artists need to work all the time in the new generations. I was just going to riff a little bit on what you said about lockdown, and obviously the open air museum. It wasn't such an issue for you. Myself and my students, we come to the Netherlands every March, mainly for the European Fine Art Fair in Maastricht, but we also go to Amsterdam for various reasons. And I take a small group of those students to you. I remember the year 2020, when COVID was growing globally, we did come to you, and then we moved down by coach to Maastricht, during which the fair was controversially closed because gallerists were picking up the virus. We immediately moved the students back to the UK, but many of them went back to Russia, back to China, and we didn't see them again physically for a year. But in that same year, 2020, Anna, you asked me to contribute an article on ethics and street art for your first official catalogue entitled Magic Dozen. We have a copy in our institute library. Can you say something about the problems and solutions involved in, you know, how we've talked about other museological strategies that you have for a street art. How does the catalogue fit into that?
I like the word you used, preserve. We broke it down into document, catalog, preserve, and display. Because I cannot take my 150 square meters Milkmaid version of Vermeer and put it somewhere else. But I can record a memory of it. And if I can complement it with the statements, let's call it witness statements of stakeholders, I think that's what participatory heritage is. And therefore, catalog was the first attempt. We also had to smuggle it because there is no money for publications. So we had to create an exhibition which would be complemented by the catalog. And that would be our first written record, publish or perish, of our collection. So together with the art historian, I looked into two heritage students. We looked into our collection and we picked up 12 artists, which at the time most represented the transformation and evolution of street art, from pioneers to innovators to educators. Because to me, street art plays in 5 to 7 different fields. And for the Heritage Project, we defined the first evaluation table of street art, because if in the Dutch heritage you want to enter an artwork like your student with a soap installation into official heritage register, it has to pass a very rigid Excel sheet with 138 questions. We studied this sheet and we came to the conclusion that it's completely inapplicable to street art. So we wrote our own. And that's what we tested in the last year during the roundtables. We've come up with 4 main categories of where street art has an impact and therefore value, whether it's direct or indirect value, but it has. And that's why you're opening, I've asked 2 people to open the first catalog. It was you and Stinkfish. You, because you come from Sotheby's institution, it's for me, it's a pope of Roman Catholic Church when it comes to art evaluation. Yeah, really, because it's from what you said on one of your first trips, that you take these innocent, naive students and you face them with reality of art market, law, and ethics. That's kind of what appeals to me as well, is that we take this innocent art movement and we try to face it with reality, that if it reaches the art market, it has to be evaluated. Who evaluates it? How evaluates it? One of the questions that came up, what is more impact? The name of the artist and his or her popularity, or opinion of the local people? And sometimes the piece that artistically low value could score high end on impact, and at the same time, sometimes the piece which is super artistic, completely misunderstood by local population and is considered to be out of place. So that's why I think that the catalog was our first publication, followed by a second publication called Street Art and Democracy, which was also attached to an exhibition. But this time I wanted to make an almanac of the city. So when the visitor asks me, huh, are you a museum? Huh? And what about the big building with canvases? Well, here's the little book. It's free. There you see major galleries deal with street art. You have a little map of the artworks in the city, which goes beyond summer collection. Here's a Strat, here is a Moko, here are the galleries, here are some photographers, and here are some stories of local artists. So the third book and the fourth book are more exhibition related, of a story of a neighborhood, but the Heritage Project will produce an e-paper, which I believe for me is the next summer book about preservation, documentation, history, and participation, or participatory history, because that's what's really happening from legal point of view. When people decide what gets painted, they curate an artist.
Yeah, it's fantastic, Anna, hearing your use of this evolving terminology as well. It's kind of always a struggle, I think, particularly with emerging art scenes such as street art, which obviously has a history, but it's become really big in the new millennium in particular. And I think trying to find verbal equivalent languages to talk about it is quite difficult. I was just going to ask you, just going forward, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the future year, and can you tell us what Amsterdam 750 is, and are you going to be part
Yes.
of it? How are you preparing for it?
So for us, we are now focused on 4 main pillars within our organization. One is a collection management, and that entails creating new artworks. We have 6 to 7 in the pipeline. They vary by location, size, participatory methods, but they are all paid and commissioned. And exhibitions, because Sama's new location is now in 2 little apartments in the Poet district of Amsterdam New West. One is a community living lab, and another one is my office. And they are connected at the back with an amazing community garden, which I'm very, very happy is blossoming. So that's where we exhibit and master plan the new artworks. Then we have the second pillar, heritage and digitalization. Heritage is where we do research, such as National Heritage Grant on a Faro ruling about how do you preserve a fur mural? How do you do participatory? Can you stretch the brackets of waarderingsformulieren in Dutch, of evaluation formula? And can you introduce new rules for the new art movement to the national heritage? These are the lectures and these are the work with the heritage professional. Digitalization is another grant. Immersive technologies are gaining popularity. A huge CCCC fund is coming up in 200 millions in the Netherlands for the next 3-4 years. And virtual reality and augmented reality is one of the digital tools that could help us to preserve, document, revisit street art in the future, because I agree with you that new generation deserve their own art. But I think the digital bridge will bring this art closer to the new generation who will be making new art. So I'm very proud to announce that we received a generous fund from Digital Cultural Agency of the Netherlands to create the first digital street art depot. So we're going to test artificial intelligence, we're going to test VR, AR, splats, Nintanic, all the new fancy words are there, and we're working with brilliant teams of brilliant professionals to help to bring the dream to reality. And this would be the first digital catalog of summer collection with all the trimmings, and this hopefully will replace Axial library system, which is costly and not as appealing to new generation we're trying to make a contact with as the one we make ourselves. The third pillar is community building and impact. We are in a community, we're working with communities. So again, I'm very proud. We've just received 35,000 euros from Oranje Fonds and Funds for Cultural Participation for the neighborhood garden of stories. But in the neighborhood garden of stories, there are 10 little murals which could be produced together with the residents and 10 local young artists in the Poet district before it gets demolished. So this is connected to collection management, to heritage and digitalization, and the fourth pillar, which is education. I'm very happy to share that we received a generous 400,000 euro grant from European Union to create a digital toolkit for youth workers, together with Reggio Emilia in Italy, Club Cultural in Lisbon, European Project Management Agency in Czech Republic, ALDA, Association Local Democracy Agencies, who connects this toolkit to Ukraine, because it could be used for youth workers dealing with inclusion issues and trauma of war, and us. And together with Freie University, we just finished the first curriculum, how street art could be used in 10 tutorials as a tool for youth workers for inclusion. We sent this.
Go on.
I know.
Yeah,
This
yeah. No,
year.
it reminds me of we've got community gardens have grown up a lot in London, and I just love going to them. You know, have a little cafe, but they're bringing the community in to create a little bit of nature. There's a lovely one in by Camden Lock. In the regenerated area of King's Cross that you might have seen. But Anna, I'm aware of the time now, and I think probably I I just must finish by saying that, you know, I have learnt an awful lot from you and your artists and your wonderful museum, and I really look forward to visiting you again next March. And I wish you a thank you, Anna Stolyarova, the director of SAMA, the Street Art Museum in Amsterdam, for sharing such interesting discussions about which this is what you're a genius at. You're a business person, but you're actually a romantic as well. And I think this is very, very suitable for what you do with the amazing artists. And anyone listening to this, if you're going to Amsterdam at any point, do make an effort to get out to this area. And I'd just like to finish by wishing Anna and her colleagues a happy festive break when eventually it comes. It's not far away. So thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you, David. And just quick note on 750 of Amsterdam. It's a birthday of the city. Official celebration is next year. We filed a plan for International Street Art Summit, which hopefully will be approved, and hopefully we'll see you there as a speaker. And thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Anna.